Sammy's Bookshelf. I'm Sammy and this is my October wrap-up. I read a whopping 9 books in October, so let's get straight into it. Was the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which is John Green's newest release and also his first non-fiction book. This book is a collection of essays, each focused on the Anthropocene, which is art impact on the planet, and at the end of every essay he rates whatever he's talking about out of 5 stars. I was actually not expecting to like this book as much as I did. I thought this would be my least favorite of all the John Green books, since obviously I'm not really a big non-fiction reader, but I actually ended up really enjoying this book, and I think now it's one of my favorite John Green books. And I think a big reason why I enjoyed it so much is that I decided to actually read it as an audiobook. I don't usually listen to audiobooks because, number one, I like to see the actual page and the words with my eyes. I'm a visual person, so being able to see it with my eyes, it just makes the info that I'm reading actually sink into my brain. And I also often like to use my own imagination with what the characters sound like and the way they say the dialogue and things like that. But because this was a non-fiction book, I didn't really have to worry about that, and I also knew that John Green narrated the audiobook, and so I decided to try out the audiobook. And I also ended up getting the ebook as well and following along with the audiobook, so I still actually got to see the words on the page with my own eyes. And this was the best decision I could have made. It was so nice to actually hear John Green narrate the essays. It was kind of just like I was talking to a friend, because a lot of these anecdotes that he's telling are from his own life. And also all the essays were just so great. I don't think there was one essay that I didn't like. But if you're kind of iffy on whether you want to read this book because you're not super into non-fiction, I would definitely recommend reading the audiobook version. There's also 3 bonus essays on the audiobook version, so another reason why I would highly recommend the audiobook. I give the Anthropocene Reviewed a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read, continuing on with my Cassandra Clare reread, was Clockwork Princess, which is the 3rd and final book in the Infernal Devices trilogy. This book is such a great conclusion to a fantastic trilogy. Cassandra Clare does such a great job of finales, and this book is no exception. I went into this book thinking that I probably wouldn't get as emotional as I did the first time that I read it, because it was a reread and I knew what to expect. I knew what was going to happen and how it was all going to end. But I was wrong. I was just as emotional as I was the first time that I read it, which meant I was pretty much crying throughout a good 3/4 of this whole book. I just love these characters. The ending is so perfect. This trilogy will always have a special place in my heart. I don't know what else to say. I feel like I've already said everything about this trilogy in my previous wrap-ups. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. No surprises there. I love this trilogy. The next couple books I'm going to talk about are books I read as part of the Thrillathon, which was a Halloween-inspired readathon. I also have a reading vlog up right now documenting my experience participating in this readathon, and you can watch that right now. So the first book that I read for the readathon is actually not a spooky book. I was really in the mood to read Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, and I've been wanting to read that book for quite some time, so I thought, since I'm in the mood for it, I'm just going to read it anyway, even though it's not spooky. I enjoyed this book, but I didn't actually enjoy it as much as I thought I was going to. I just feel like it didn't quite live up to all the hype. I feel like all the hype that surrounded this book ended up being its detriment, because I just had such high expectations. I thought it would blow me away and become one of my favorite contemporaries ever, but it just didn't. I found it to be pretty average and not really anything too special. By no means was it a bad book. I still enjoyed myself and I still had fun reading it. It just wasn't something that was super memorable. Pretty much as soon as I finished reading it, I didn't even think about it again. And usually the books that end up holding a special place in my heart and end up being my favorite books are ones that stick with me, but I just feel like Punk 57 didn't have that kind of impact on me in any way. And also there were times that I kind of laughed at the book, not to be confused with laughing with the book. There were just some like moments that I found really cringy, and it was just like, why is this happening? Why are they doing this? Why did that just happen? And I do feel like it kind of comes comes with the territory of like that new adult contemporary romance, but still I feel like those scenes could have been just cut out. It was only like 2 or 3 times in the book that this happened, and more in like the first half. I would still definitely recommend this book if you're a fan of new adult contemporary books. I just, in my opinion, have read better new adult contemporaries in my reading life. I ended up giving Punk 57 a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up for the Thrillathon was actually a spooky book, and that was The Dead List by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is about a girl who is attacked on her way home from a party, and while she survives the fatal encounter, the attacker begins to leave her clues that he is not done with her yet. I really enjoyed the whole mystery of this book. It was engaging and entertaining and exactly what I was in the mood for. But what really annoyed me about this book was the romance. Jennifer L. Armentrout has a habit of just rushing romances, and they're often a bit insta-lovey, and she usually doesn't bring into account the characters' past experiences with each other. These 2 characters in particular were really close when they were younger, they grew apart, and they left off on bad terms and haven't spoken to each other in years. And when they reunite, they're immediately flirting and acting like boyfriend and girlfriend. There is no friction in their relationship. There is nothing holding them back from being together. There's no that will they, won't they, which is such a staple in a romance in a book. You need that friction and they will they, won't they to make it engaging. And it's so frustrating because this romance had such potential to be really interesting because both these characters had this past and this shared traumatic experience. So that was all completely glossed over, and all that potential was just lost, and it's just really disappointing. However, in the second half of the book, as the mystery started to ramp up, I started to enjoy this book a lot more, because as the mystery became the more forefront of the plot, I was able to kind of just push aside the fact that I didn't enjoy the romance. And I actually did manage to predict the ending of this book to a certain extent. There was something that Jennifer Armentrout actually surprised me with at the ending of this book, which surprised me, it shocked me, because usually I'm really good at guessing a plot twist because I've read so many books with plot twists in them. I'm usually really good at guessing what they're gonna be. So props to you, Jennifer, you almost bested me. Almost, not quite. I ended up giving The Dead List a 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black, a book I've been meaning to read for so many years, and I'm so happy that I finally read it. So if you don't know, this is a vampire book. It takes place in a world there are vampires, and everyone knows that there are vampires, but they are quarantined, or at least most of them are quarantined in what are called cold towns. And one day our main character, Tanner, wakes up from a party and everyone is dead, except for her ex-boyfriend who has been bitten by a vampire, and a vampire who is on the run from other vampires. And so Tanner and this vampire and her ex-boyfriend must travel to one of these cold towns. This book was really great. I loved the spooky and creepy vibe that this book had, and who doesn't love a good vampire book, right? What I really enjoyed about this book was the overall structure. This book enters right into the action when Tanner wakes up the morning of the party and finds everyone dead, and I really enjoyed that because this world is so interesting. We would kind of expect there to be some world building and character backstory before we really get into the action, but we don't. We go straight into the action, and then the chapters alternate between present day and kind of backstory and world building, and I feel like that structure was really effective in telling the story. But also these chapters where we alternate to backstory and world building are only ever a couple chapters long, so we're not away from the action in the present day for too long. The romance in this book is also great. If you're a person who enjoys having the romance as a side plot and not as part of the main plot of the book, I think you'd really enjoy this. The romance definitely takes a back seat to kind of everything that Tanner is going through. Overall, this story was just so well constructed. The world was so interesting. The characters were great. The romance was great. It was just overall a great time. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up a slasher book, and this was actually a reread, and that is There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. I first read this pretty much when it first came out because I was very intrigued when Stephanie Perkins released a slasher book after only releasing books such as Anna and the French Kiss, Lola and the Boy Next Door, Isla and the Happily Ever After. A slasher book called There's Someone Inside Your House was quite a genre shift for Stephanie Perkins. But going into my reread, it was kind of just like reading it for the first time because I had forgotten so much about it. It follows a girl named Makani who moves to this small town from Hawaii, and her new high school ends up being the victim of a brutal serial killer. The thing that I loved about this book was just how fast of a read it is. It's less than 300 pages. It's super short, as you can see. It was just the perfect length for the story. It was so fast paced and there's never a dull moment, which is exactly what you want in a book like this as you're trying to discover who this serial killer is and why they're killing people. And it also just makes the book super bingeable. I read this whole thing pretty much in one sitting and it was so much fun to just inhale this whole story all at once. I loved the romance between Ollie and Makani. It was so great. I mean, it's not surprising that Stephanie Perkins was able to write a really great romance amongst this serial killer plotline because obviously Stephanie Perkins is a romance writer, and I feel like I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. I felt all the fear and the anxiety that the characters were feeling as they try to escape being the next victim of this serial killer. I also watched the film adaptation that's on Netflix, which I feel like came out of nowhere. I feel like I'm usually pretty in the know about what books are being adapted, but I had no idea this was being adapted. Although having watched the movie, I would definitely recommend just sticking to the book. The plot of the movie was kind of just all over the place. They changed a lot from the source material and Stephanie Perkins definitely told the story better. I was actually going to do a full review of the movie as a video, but I realized that to do this I'd have to rewatch the movie to take notes, and I simply did not want to do that. I did not want to watch that movie again. But the book was great. You don't need to watch the movie, read the book. I gave the book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. As part of the Thrillathon, I also read 4 short stories from 2 anthologies. One was called Grimm, which was edited by Christine Johnson, and the other was Defy the Dark, which was edited by Saundra Mitchell. So the short stories I read were Beast Beast by Tessa Gratton, which I ended up giving a 3 out of 5 stars. I also read Better by Sean David Hutchison, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Sleep Talk by Courtney Summers, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. And the final short story I read was Eyes in the Dark by Rachel Hawkins, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. So that was all the books I ended up reading for the Thrillathon. After reading all those spooky books, all I wanted was a cutesy contemporary romance, so I ended up picking up the Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This follows a girl named Olive, and she is a scientist studying for her PhD. And she tells her friend that she is in a relationship so her best friend doesn't feel guilty about dating one of Olive's kind of ex-boyfriends. But one night, Olive stumbles upon her best friend at the lab when she's supposed to be on a date, so she kisses the first person that she sees, which ends up being Adam Carlson, a professor who is known for being strict and cruel to his students. But he agrees to be her fake boyfriend, and romance and the fake dating trope ensues. This book was everything I wanted and more. I loved Adam and Olive's romance, and their interactions were so much fun to read. I ended up starting this book quite late at night, but if I had started it just a couple hours earlier, I definitely would have read this whole book in one sitting. It was just so addictive, and it was everything you want in a contemporary romance. If you love contemporary romance, this is the book for you. I know you probably already heard about this book because it's everywhere on TikTok, but trust me, this book is great. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finally read The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This follows 2 characters, Natasha and Daniel, who meet one day in New York and end up falling in love in one day. But unfortunately, Natasha and her family are in America illegally, and they are being deported back to Jamaica the next day. This book was so beautiful. My favorite part of this story was how we didn't just get from Natasha and Daniel's point of view, we also got chapters from the point of views of characters that they interact with throughout the day, and it kind of just shows how everybody is connected. It was so beautifully written. The relationship between Natasha and Daniel was written so well. I really believed that they were in love despite the fact that they only knew each other for one day. I know there is also a film adaptation, but I'm very reluctant to watch it because I've heard so many not so great things. But I'm sure curiosity will get the best of me and I will end up watching the adaptation adaptation at some point in the near future. I also loved the epilogue of this book. It was just, it was so good, written so beautifully. This book was great. Nicola Yoon is such a great writer. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The last book I read in October was another Nicola Yoon book, her newest release, Instructions for Dancing. This book was also great. It follows a girl named Evie who, after her parents' messy divorce, has stopped believing in love and happy endings. And she ends up donating all her romance books, but in exchange she gets a book called Instructions for Dancing. After finding this book, every time she sees a couple kiss, she gets a vision of how this couple met, the important moments in their relationship, and also how their relationship will end, which just enforces everything that Evie believes about love and happy endings. In order to try and stop these visions, she goes to an address which is printed on the book, and she ends up participating in a ballroom competition, dancing with a boy she just met called X, and she ends up falling in love with him. I enjoyed this book a lot. I loved the little touch of magic, and I also just loved Evie's journey throughout the book. One of the big themes of this book goes along with the saying that it's better to have loved and lost than never loved at all, and it was so interesting to see Evie kind of falling in love with X, but also kind of being pulled in the opposite direction of seeing her parents' messy divorce and the way that it has affected her family. And Nicola Yoon does such a great job of making the messages of this book so impactful through Evie's journey. I feel like there's a lot of conflict with the ending of this book between the people who have read this. Either people love the ending or they hate it. Obviously, I won't go into details because of spoilers, but I ended up really enjoying the ending. I think it made every theme and every message that Nicola Yoon was conveying so much more powerful. It left more of a lasting impression. And also, similar with The Sun Is Also a Star, the last chapter is just so beautifully written. Nicola Yoon is just great at writing last chapters and wrapping up her books so beautifully in a way that will leave an impression on you and leave you thinking about the book for days and days after you finished reading it. I also gave Instructions for Dancing a 4 out of 5 stars. So that was all the books I read in October. I had a great reading month, as you just saw. Let me know what books you read in October and which was your favorite, and I'll see you next time. Bye!